Hundreds of registered franchise professionals, dozens of in-depth franchise conversations, 2 franchise live shows. My search to interview an apprentice star is over. I hope you enjoyed
That brings back memories.
that. Welcome to the Franchise Show, and this is a very special episode for me. This is the show where we get under the hat of all things franchising and all things business. And it's a live show. Well, it's live if it's the 21st of January 2025 between 5:15 and about 6 o'clock. So what do? Every week on the Franchise Show, we take a new topic and we have a lovely guest. And today is absolutely no exception to that. We have a fantastic guest, a guest who I'm very excited about having on our show. It's the wonderful Gregory Ebbs. Gregory, welcome to the Franchise Show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute honor. Hello, everybody.
You are welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to have somebody who's not only a former star of The Apprentice that we've alluded to there, but also a young person in business, somebody who has grown their own business from scratch and somebody who really understands those different growth models. So today we are going to be talking about the role that apprentices have in the industry of franchising and the role that young people have in franchising. And Gregory is going to help us by, first of all, giving us a little introduction to himself and his business and how that came about and how you grew it. So Gregory, perhaps you could give everyone a little introduction.
Hello, everybody. So I say, my name's Greg. I'm 28 years old and I've set up this business. It's going on like 4 or 5 years now, but I've done a few things over the course. The latest project, I've got 2 projects going on, is I have a very unique business. I sell antique firearms and cannons on one side, but I also run a marketplace for antiques where I build clients' websites and all the products go to the marketplace. And finally, I also do, I build WordPress plugins for small businesses to automate the social media. So it's very, very complicated, but I've got lots of things going on.
Fantastic. So at 28 years old, when was business, when did that first come into your life that you thought, well, I think I want to start my own business here. I think I want to be an entrepreneur. Where did that spark come from and how old were you?
Well, my father's always set up a lot of businesses in his earlier youth. So I think he's been a big inspiration from a very young age. He set up cafes, he's set up restaurants, he's built houses in Thailand. My uncles in Thailand have set up, one of them set up a gold mine in Thailand because half my family's Thai. And yeah, generally I come from a very entrepreneurial background, but I think from my sort of childhood, I think it really goes back to the old story of the tuck shop, doesn't it? Where you buy a few sweets in a spa and you sell it for a profit to your students, and eventually the teachers have a go at you and then they start buying sweets off you from school as well. So it goes back to that. But with regards to antiques, I think it came to my 10th birthday, where with one of the many things I do, where my father went up to me and says, "What do you want for Christmas?" And my response was, "I want a flintlock musket." So I got a flintlock musket, and then I got a sword for my Christmas. So birthday was gun, sword for Christmas, and then I come from an antiques background, so I do artworks, I do paintings, cannons. I've got a 1-ton cannon arriving soon. A variety of different items, really. So I think it goes back to that, an entrepreneurial background plus the tuck shop.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think entrepreneurs are born at quite a young age. You know, when you're a child, you don't see any boundaries, do you? You know, you just go for these things. And I think I've always been a bit like that. I've always had some sort of crazy idea or another. So I love that, and especially at such a young age. Well, look, before we start getting into the conversation today, let's recognize a couple of people who have joined us early today. We have the lovely Penny Hopkinson. Great to have you with us, Penny. Penny is an expert in writing manuals.
Wow.
In fact, I always bring a book up. Sometimes it's the right way around, sometimes it isn't. Is it the right way around today? It is. There it is.
Perfect.
There's a lovely book. So if you are in the franchise industry and you're looking for an ops manual, then Penny is certainly your lady for that. Please reach out to her. And in fact, you can scan a QR code that's right there anyway. So great to have you, Penny. We also have the ever wise Simon Wise with us. Simon, great to have you with us. And Simon has put hello, franchise friends. Well, it's great to have you both. This, as I said, is a live show. So if you do have any comments, any thoughts about young people in business, where entrepreneurialism and apprenticeships fit into franchising, then please drop a question or a comment into the comment box, and we will certainly get to that as we have our discussion. So Gregory, let's have a discussion about your current business, about your antiques business, because that's a very interesting business. When did you start? When did you start that business?
Well, more professionally, only a few years ago. On a more on and off basis, I would say my university days, although probably even I've sort of lost track. I've been buying antiques since I was 10 years old, so for 18, nearly 19 years now. During university, I funded my university, not education, the lifestyle. So being able to, just accommodation, for example, I fund a lot of my university costs associated through the use of uniforms. My niche has always been Victorian firearms and uniforms, and funny enough, I built quite a large client base as a consequence, and I made quite a fair amount of money just buying Victorian uniforms from 1890 and then selling them to museums across the country, including English Heritage, National Trust, all the way to Malta, Australia, and New Zealand. So I think it starts from there. And then come COVID, obviously, I was working for another employer before COVID, after my university studies. And then come COVID, when I returned, I had a lot of time on my hands with the lockdown. And that's when I set up the antiques business on a more larger scale, a more professional thing, because obviously there's not a lot you can do when you're cooped up at home, is there?
No,
So,
absolutely. I think a lot of businesses were born during that time, actually.
Exactly. So it sort of came from that, and then I've sort of branched out into different areas. So although my sort of passion is militaria, I have been slowly developing a passion for art, so historic Georgian and 19th and earlier 17th and 16th century art. So I've been getting heavily involved in that, and I love the provenance. I love it when you buy a painting and you're able to identify the artist and the name and the signature, and then you can find the context for why it's owned. And I enjoy that sort of. It's a good way of being involved in history, whilst at the same time running your own business.
Fantastic. I love that. I love that you funded your lifestyle at university through entrepreneurialism. I think that's fantastic, and really something that young people, can look at and hopefully repeat and do a similar thing themselves. Let's have a quick look, because we've got a few more people here and we've got a few questions and things. So let's get to those. Let's quickly say hello to 2 or 3 people that have joined us. So we've got Natalia. Natalia is our resident legal beagle in the world of franchising. Great to have you with us, Natalia. And she's put, very passionate about young people in business, fully and wholeheartedly support it. So very much excited about this episode. Well, so am I, Natalia. Please put in any questions you like for Greg. And we will certainly get to those as we go through today's episode. We've got the lovely Joe Caruso all the way from America. Great to have you here, Joe, as ever. He's put happy Franchise Tuesday, Harvey Tuck and Gregory Ebbs. Well, happy Franchise Tuesday to you as well. Now we have the lovely Neil Newman with us. And Neil has put, hello, Harvey. I just corrected your survey logic. Hope you don't mind. Well, look, while we're talking about surveys, Neil is from our lovely sponsors, Gather. And we have a survey running live today. If you look in the comments of this on LinkedIn, you will see a link to that survey. And if you scan the QR code to the left, the little one, that will take you right to that survey. And it's a survey all about young people, apprenticeships and apprentices in business, and how we can encourage and get more people hiring and discussing this important subject. Let's have a look. This is a good question here from Simon. Greg, did your schooling stroke education fuel your entrepreneurial spirit or dampen it? Great question, Simon. What do you make of this one, Greg?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. I mean, I don't know. I think obviously business studies and other areas has very little. It gives you certain foundations, but it's yeah. I mean, schooling and education provides a context, but it's not the same as running a business, is it? So I think my education was definitely helped my entrepreneurial spirit, at least in this particular aspect, because my education was military history, international relations. And then my master's was a focus on military history. So that very much coincides with what I do, which is selling cannons and machine guns and others. And having a background in history really sort of helps when it comes to the methodology of researching particular objects and the resources, the links, etc. So it's definitely helped. It's also helped with the critical thinking aspect. So no, I think it's definitely helped. It's helped develop the skills necessary. But I do think to set up a business from a younger age, you need to. I know a lot of friends have gone on to history, but they haven't set up businesses, because studying history is a skill, isn't it? But to set up a business, you've got sort of a willingness to try out new things, and that's a different sort of skill, which is developed through your own personal life and your personal experience and the people you associate with. So it's developed the skill. To answer your question in short, it's developed the skills necessary to help me set up the business, but I don't necessarily think it's fueled or dampened my entrepreneurial spirit. I think my family's background was the reason why I got into business.
Absolutely. So that spirit was there, and it came from who you surrounded yourself with and your family, and was obviously very well supported and encouraged during your younger life. So therefore, probably during your schooling and education, whatever happened there, you would have probably found a route that fueled it as well, I would have thought. So great. Let's have a look. We've got a few more people here. We've got a few more questions coming up. If you have just joined us today, this is the Franchise Show, and today we are talking to a star of The Apprentice, a young entrepreneur, Gregory Ebbs. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on, and it's been a fascinating conversation so far. We're going to keep the conversation on apprentices, on young people in franchising, but at some point today, we definitely are going to get to The Apprentice, because I'm a big fan of the show. I make no secret of the fact that I'm a fan of the show. So we are going to find out some behind the scenes stuff as well. So look forward to that coming up towards the latter part of today's show. Let's have a look. We've got another good comment and question here from Simon. And Greg, Simon's put, Greg, as a young entrepreneur, what is your perception and understanding of franchising? Would you start a business with a franchise? Great question, Simon. And I really like this. I like this as a question to any young person, because a lot of people aren't aware of it, don't completely understand it. And I think it's an educational piece that we as an industry need to put in front of younger people. What's your understanding of it, or what was your understanding of it?
Well, I'm going to sort of answer the big one, which is, what would you start a business with franchise? And that will sort of feed into the first question. My understanding of franchise is obviously you pay to use the intellectual property of that particular business, and use the rights, and therefore you are selling. You run the business, but obviously you're using the name of other companies, such as McDonald's. You can use a McDonald's franchise. You own a business, but using the McDonald's name.
Yeah, using their systems, their
Yeah,
proven
exactly.
model. That's right. Yeah, you got it.
And would I start a business with a franchise? Well, it's almost to say, hey, would you like to? You now have the opportunity to set up a franchise at McDonald's. My answer would be no. And the reason is because I'm not well versed in that particular business. I've got no experience in it. I know nothing about it. I know that McDonald's is a very successful franchise. I know that there's a lot of successful franchisees who run with the McDonald's brand, but I have no idea where to start with that. And I think that's part of a bigger system, isn't it? Being a franchise is like using a tool. It's using a tool to achieve an end, and that is to use the brand of the company in order to try and engage and increase sales for your business. But I would never start a franchise with a business which I'm unfamiliar with. I
No.
think you always need to do research. I think franchises are most effective when you've got experience in that particular industry, or you've worked for the company
Mm.
which you're buying off the franchise for to become a franchisee. So if I've got 15 years experience in McDonald's, then I think, actually, I know how this is run. I know exactly how to drive this and make it successful. I know what tools I need. Then I would set up a business or franchise. But I don't think you should never set up a franchisee purely expecting to succeed based on the name alone. You've got to know the systems, the ins and outs. You need to know
Yeah.
everything about it to drive it forward.
I understand. I understand. I think, though, franchising as a model for growth. So let's take your business, okay, your antiques business, just as an example, so you can really understand how it could potentially happen. But if there was a way to, for instance, I mean, you can cover out the whole country, I would have thought, and possibly worldwide. But let's say you couldn't, and the only way you could grow your antiques business was to open up new shops and grow regionally across the UK. So franchising could be a way that you've developed your marketplace, and you've developed your business and how you go about valuing antiques, and you've developed this model. Then rather than you paying to scale it, you could use the franchising model, and it doesn't work in every case, but you could certainly use it to scale a business. What's your thoughts about using franchising to scale a business that a young person owns?
I think restaurants, I think service-led industries, it could be really a powerful, effective tool. I think with antiques, it's very different. There's too many costs associated, and people don't necessarily buy from the company; often buy the object. So if you buy the object, then there's always a set price. So you've got to buy it cheap, and therefore franchising would be a very costly affair there. But if you're running a service-led industry or something which is reliant on a name, which antiques is slightly an exception for, then I think it could be a terrific tool to achieve your aims.
Mm. I think you've really hit the nail on the head there and understood franchising really well there. When you said there about buying an object, and obviously, with antiques, it's very much that, someone is buying a very specific object that they know about, and, the brand around that where they buy it is not necessarily the most important thing. But I think you've absolutely got it. It's that service, it's that model, it's the other things that you can add to it. And we've often said in franchising, it doesn't apply to every industry as well. Let's have a quick look, because we've got a few more comments coming in. It's always good to get to this. This show is a conversation not between two people, it's a conversation between a community, and we are all having a good chat here. So I love the comments that come in, and please keep those rolling in as we go along today. We've got the lovely Julie Waits, who runs something called First Fridays, a great resource for franchising. And she's put, good evening from the northeast of England, cold and wet today. We always get a good weather report from Julie. So great to have that, and great to have you with us. Let us know your thoughts, Julie, on young people in franchising and apprenticeships in franchising. Let's have a look at something here from Penny. Penny's put, we were all apprentices when we started in our chosen job. Ethical franchises are unique in that the support is always there. What did you do to become the expert you are now in firearms, swords, and cannons? My husband is a fine art auctioneer and valuer. Okay, so Penny's got a bit of an affiliation here to what you do. But great question. How did you become that expert? What
I'm
did you do?
I'm not an expert. I'll make that very clear. I've studied firearms and swords and cannons for a long time. It's a passion of mine. But to be an expert, I think you need to be in the field for a good 50 years. And the level of detail you need to, I mean, There's a lot of people who claim to be experts in their particular fields, but the truth of the matter is that the subject matter is so large that you need to know, to be a true expert, you need to know the composition of metals within the sword blade. You need to know the method of production. You need to know the patterns, the style of the hilt, the
Mhm.
style of the pommel. It's too large. So no, I wouldn't describe myself as an expert, but I would say I've got a good general knowledge of the subject, and more importantly, I know where to look to find the answers to my questions, which is the most important thing. I think to be an expert, you need to dedicate your life to a topic. So that's not something which I've achieved as of yet. Um, I haven't visited the National Archives to study certain books from the primary resources. I've read the secondary, but not the primary. So, with regards to becoming knowledgeable about it, it's very much sort of a trial and error job. You need to join. You need to join various different groups. You need to debate the subject matter intently, but you also need to question everything. I've discovered that in my sort of field. I don't, when I buy an item and someone says something is, I'm very skeptical these days because I've been burned financially too many times based on other people's beliefs. And also had successes. I mean, one of the best ones we did, this is something which my father did in his younger years, and I've repeated this on a smaller scale in other aspects. But my father purchased a decanter from a specific glass auction many years ago, 5 years ago. It was a job lot. The auctioneer was prestigious, has a 50-year experience in the industry, and claims themselves to be an expert in glass. This job lot of 50 glasses went for £500, I think, of which one glass was a Powell's decanter from 1834. And there was one other decanter, which my father identified as a 1685 Ravenscroft decanter. In short, it's the first lead glass decanter ever made in the UK commercially. And we sold that for £10,000. And that was mislabeled in a job lot by a
Wow.
specific glass auctioneer. So you've
Yeah.
got to do your own research. You've got to question everyone. Don't be afraid to dispute. And I'm very skeptical towards experts. The only people I trust are people who I know are reliable from basic experience, from conversations. But also, one's got to be cautious about the literature because the literature in my field is often plagiarized by bad actors. That
Mm.
German helmets, as a very common one, only a few years ago, there were various books being produced about German helmets where the authors were making the fakes themselves and then publishing the helmets in their books, in their original, and then producing them in large quantities for the market and selling those German helmets at £10,000-20,000 a piece. So it's very much about critical thinking and doing your own research to ensure you don't do mistakes. By all means, rely. There
Love
are
it.
people
I
very
love
advanced in the subject matter, but you've got to have your due diligence not to do
I
many
I
mistakes.
think I think what you've alighted to there that I picked up on is that passion, and what you had there at the beginning is, and what you still have is a passion. Now, success in business, becoming a franchisee, becoming a good franchisor, an ethical franchisor, you need that passion. You need to be able to care. You need that interest. You need to be curious, And I think that those things. I think it's really refreshing and important that you haven't classified yourself as an expert. And I think even if you never classified yourself as an expert, you then always remain open. You always remain a listener. You always remain curious. So I love the answer to that. We've got some great questions coming up from Joe, from Natalia, and from Julie. Now, Julie has put in a question about the apprentice experience, and in about 7 minutes, and I can't wait for this, we are going to get on to the apprentice. So brace yourself, Greg. We're going to be talking about it. But let's have a look. We've got here a question here from Joe. Joe's put, Gregory Ebbs, would you see yourself after proving your own business concept? Would you expand through franchising? Well, we touched upon that, didn't we? Just now, and I think you understand the principles behind franchising. But it's not quite right for your business at the moment with antiques.
Yeah,
Um, but let's say you did have a service-based business. I mean, I'm trying to think of something now, but maybe a picture cleaning or a restoration type business, for those antiques that you're dealing with. That's something then that you could potentially grow, create a brand, make sure people knew that brand was associated with doing a good job. and then create that model. And then that's something that you could possibly expand through franchising. It's a great question, Joe. Let's have a look. No, go on. Sorry, Greg.
Could I think Natalia's point, and it's something which I didn't mention, and she's absolutely right to correct me. So use of IP is only licensing, franchising about support, training, quality control. And that's absolutely right. I didn't mention that, and apologies. But I think that feeds in to my wider point. And let's say I'm not an expert in franchising. I don't run a franchising business, but I do believe as a young person, there's so many risks, especially from a young age. I mean, if your business fails as a young person, okay, you might not lose financially, but you've got to think of something else. You've got to think of setting up another business, or you've got to get a job. And if you get a job, unfortunately, employers, in my experience, don't necessarily value setting your own business in the same extent as working for an employer, because they often, there's a method to it. There's a lack of, generally it's just more difficult from personal experience to get a job if you worked for yourself as opposed to for an employer. And I see that from a lot of my friends who set up businesses. So therefore, the franchising is, you've got to be so careful to try and make it succeed. Otherwise, you're sort of back to step one. But more importantly, about the support and training, there are risks, financial risks associated. So although you can start from ground up and you do get the support and training, you still got to do your due research for the company. You've got to make sure that the company is right for you, or sorry, the method is right for you. You've got to make sure that you've got a passion for what you do. Obviously, setting up a business, you never start as an expert. You always start from scratch and you build ground up. But you've still got to, you've got to do your background research as a young person, regardless. And that's, I suppose, is what I was trying to get emphasized. You've got to be careful, because the risks associated with being a young person are tremendous these days.
Yes, I think you're right. And I think that when I speak to young people, they have a grasp sometimes of franchising, but a lot of people don't know what it is. A lot of people just assume it's McDonald's, and associate that with the franchise model. I'm going to bring up something from Natalia, and then I think we're going to go on to another point. But let's bring this one up quickly here. You don't need, but that's the point. You don't need to know, because the franchisor will teach you how to operate that business. It's the skills that are important. Franchising is a lot more than IP and the name. Yes, it is. It is a lot more than that, but it is that, the name is also important. The brand and the name, add to and associate back to whether they behave ethically, the model, the proven model, and how they are behaving as a franchise. So look, love that, Natalia. I can always rely on you keeping us in check here on the Franchise Show. So thanks so much for your comments. I'm gonna ask you a question, Greg. How do you think we can get more younger people into business as an option when they're, let's say, it's at school or high school, and particularly now you have a grasp of franchising, and let's say someone is going to become a franchisee and they're a young person. How do you reckon we get that message to younger people?
That's a good question. How do you get the message across to younger people? Well, there's a lot of barriers to entry for businesses, isn't there? So you need to the barriers to entry are financial, but they can also be legislative, depending on the business type. So you need to make it. I think to get people interested, you actually need to get them involved from a young age, don't you? You need to try. You need to encourage people from a basic level to get them trying to sell stuff from a young age as a small tuck shop, for example. I mean, just the basic skills of buying and selling can be developed from that point on. I think one of the issues we have in schooling today, in my personal experience, is, and it's not knocking on teachers. My teachers were superb, but a lot of people I know have gone into the teaching profession from a young age and dedicated their lives to teaching younger people. And that's great, because so many people benefit from that. But you can only go what you know. And teachers can only give the advice which they know, which is a lot of them haven't set up their own businesses. They've always gone work for an employer. So they always recommend the traditional routes. So to get younger people involved more in business, You need to be getting people who have set up their own businesses or done things which are different, and get them talking to students about their experiences and their dreams. And that way you give people ideas. It's not that young people aren't interested, is that young people don't know of the opportunities because their support network is very limited based on people's limited experience. So, as a very simple suggestion, my university, my master's degree was funded in Malta, and I paid £500 for my master's degree in 1 year masters in strategic management public policy. In the UK, a master's degree is £10,500. I found out about my master's degree because I was working in Malta at the time as a professional cannon firer, and I got the job as a professional cannon firer through selling cannons and uniforms to my boss at university. So I worked there for 4 years, and on the side of my part-time job in Malta firing cannons, I did my master's degree in Malta and saved £10,000 pursuing that. But how could a teacher recommend that you actually go to Malta to do your master's degree if they've never done that? But actually, you could find that you could actually save £10,000 in your higher education by studying abroad, considerably less. If you go to the States, it's 20, 30,000. But if you go to Germany, France, or Malta, at least up until a few years ago, I'm not sure if it's the case anymore, you could get a cheaper education and yet get a higher standard of service. My teachers were from Oxford. They were trained in Oxford and Cambridge, and one of them was the personal advisor to the Prime Minister of Malta. He had taught 2 prime ministers and 1 brigadier general. Wow. So it's about the people that you surround yourself with. And the people who advise shouldn't just come from a single background. You need a diverse portfolio of people with different experiences to suggest opportunities to younger audiences.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the people you surround yourself with. So I think it's our job as an industry to make sure that we are getting ourselves in front of younger people when they're at school age, when they're at college age, and when they're at university age, so that franchising, whether that's becoming a franchisor or whether that's becoming a franchisee, becomes another option when you look at getting a job, starting a business, and then there's franchising. So we're definitely going to do that. We've got another couple of people here. Let's recognize that we've got the lovely Paul Sims from America here, and he's put hello friends. He's from Pittsburgh. Great to have you with us. Let's read a couple of comments. We've got one from Natalia, one from Joe, and one from Simon. We're going to get those read out, and then we are going to be talking about the Apprentice. We need to get to that, so stop putting these comments in. I'm joking. It's great to have everybody here, and these are always really passionate conversations. So let's have a look. Natalia's put, my local We Love Pets franchisee is 28. There you go, snap, and has bought the business from the previous business owner, who was at the time her boss. So she was employed by the business and then bought it, which is amazing. On a side note, my kids are looking forward to their holiday with her. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for that, Natalia. Let's have a look at Simon and Joe's questions quickly. So Gregory Ebbs is making an important point for younger people who have a goal of owning one or more franchises, is to go to work in the same or similar franchise concept. Yes, absolutely. You know, that was a point that you made there. You know, pick an industry you know something about, pick an industry you're passionate about. You know, you get all of these young people that are doing degrees, and all of those degrees are on different subjects because at that point they're passionate about whatever that subject is. But the jobs, when they come out the other side of it, are often very limited, and lots of people going for those. So this gives another option for people to continue to pursue those passions and those interests. I think you're absolutely right, Greg, when you said that capital is always going to be a challenge for younger people to get over. But I think, again, as an industry, franchising needs to look at that and find, you know, more inventive ways to help younger people get over some of those capital issues. Let's have a look. I'm going to bring a question up now that came up from Julie, because it's a good way to start this. So we are now going to be talking The Apprentice. I should play that music again, but I won't now. But Julie's put, what are the key learning points from the Apprentice experience? It's a great question. You went through that whole process. What was it like from beginning to end, and what did you learn?
Well, I mean, the most common answer would be skills developed, but I want to be a bit more technical in this. I think the biggest point, which I actually learned from The Apprentice, is managing the press. I think that's the biggest aspect which I learned. I mean, obviously, I learned a lot when it comes to working with other people, but those are generic soft skills. I mean, more of a harder skill, I think, was never hire a never utilize a press agency to manage your contacts with the press, because it puts you at a disadvantage. To be more specific, when I was in The Apprentice, we had a press agency which managed our contacts with the newspapers, and part of the conditions were that we needed, if a newspaper, the Mail or the Sun or the Telegraph ever got in touch with us, we needed to send their contacts over to our newspaper agency. And I think that was a bad decision from my side. I shouldn't have gone with that advice, but that was done by the BBC. And the reason I shouldn't have gone down with that advice is because fast forward 3 years, when you want to contact a journalist, the Mail, the Telegraph, the Sun, you want to publish an article, you don't have those contacts in your inbox because you sent all of them to the newspaper agency. And the BBC only got us to use a press agency to manage our online profile. Not so, I don't think so much because they were concerned about our well-being, but more so because they had a list of every single journalist in the country who they could rely on if they ever wanted to get in touch with somebody.
Right.
So I think from a technical aspect, it's about being able to manage the press, knowing the buzzwords, how to gauge their interest. I learned a lot about, if the Mail ever publishes an article, the Metro and the Sun and other newspapers will repeat the same article. They'll often misphrase you if you're not careful. So you need to be very careful with your language. I think those sort of points were very, very useful in that particular perspective. I know it's not quite the conventional skill set, but I think that's been a tremendous learning experience. I've also learned that I learned a lot technically when it comes to website development, because on the first 20 seconds of the show going out, my website crashed with around 20,000 views in the space of a minute. So managing the technical aspect in order to cope with large numbers of people visiting your website at a single moment was very, very useful. And also, the other thing, technical aspect, is make sure you do an awful lot of bug testing on your website before you go on The Apprentice, otherwise you run into errors. So not the conventional answer, but I found those to be the most useful skills when it comes to being on The Apprentice.
I think that's really interesting, because I think a lot of people that go onto that show are very young, typically in their 20s, and you do need to be able to manage the press. And when you say manage, take advantage of and get positivity out of the process as well, which is very tricky to manage that. And I think you're absolutely right to make a point of it. Anyone, and probably 60 or 100,000 people apply for that show every year. So there's lots of interest from young entrepreneurs. And that's certainly a great piece of advice, for younger people when they go onto it. And of course, when you said there about your website, as soon as the names are revealed of the people that are going on, which is, The Apprentice is coming on in a couple of weeks or a week, isn't it? And those names have been revealed, and of course they're going to get hits on whatever social media or their websites or their businesses, and they've got to be ready to take advantage of that relatively short window of opportunity. So yeah, it's really interesting. Well, look, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Let's ask you the classic, shall we? Shall we ask you the classic? Which
Go for it.
Do you really have 20 minutes from when that phone call rings to get ready in the morning on The Apprentice?
Oh, I tell you what, those 20 minutes disappeared fairly quickly. Yes, is the answer.
Really?
Although, yes and no. I mean, ideally 20 minutes, but with regards to a lot of the ladies who are on The Apprentice, the makeup, the cameras, the setup takes a bit longer. A lot of the ladies prepared the night before, actually, or just barely got any sleep. So that's why a lot of them are really exhausted the following day. But generally speaking, yeah, the time is really short on that.
Yeah, I can't imagine you get a lot of sleep. What was your when you were on the show? I know we're going off franchising here, but I don't care. This is it's my show. We can do what we want. It's our show, of course. But what was your favourite task of all the tasks that you were involved with on the show?
Cannons.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah.
They flew us to Antigua to talk about cannons. I was quite in my element in Nelson's dockyard in Antigua.
Yes,
Uh,
I remember it very well. That must have been amazing. I mean, did you know that it was going to be cannons on that?
no, I had no idea, but I was very fortunate that I was able to absorb the information fairly quickly because in my previous job, I worked in a cannon museum. So I was able to recite a significant amount of a script from my previous job in that particular task.
I mean, that must have been amazing when you saw cannons and you thought, "Oh, yes, I'm gonna nail this." Excellent. We've got a few questions coming in, but I'm gonna put a couple more
Go
on.
for it.
It's good fun. What was Lord Sugar like? Did you get on with Lord Sugar?
I
Did
mean,
you ever call him Alan by mistake?
no, you would never do that. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the odd cuts from previous series where we do that. I think Lord Sugar's take has been a bit more. It's become a bit more stringent over the years. I remember like the early seasons with Katie Hopkins and others, where when he first went on the show, he's saying, "Oh, we're going to all stay in touch, we're going to stay in contact, etc." A lot
Yeah,
more positive. I think Lord Sugar's been doing it for such a long time now that he obviously does it for the principle of supporting young people, but
cool.
I don't think he's engaged with the candidates' lives, not to the same extent as he was in the early
No,
years, because he's been doing it for nearly 20 years now.
yeah,
Season 19 coming out. Um,
amazing.
so what he's like, to be honest, what you see on TV is not, I wouldn't say he's a particularly friendly character. He's who he is. He's a
Yeah,
man who's brought up in a very, very rough part of London, has been able to carve out a reputation, a business for himself, which is immensely successful. And when you have bad days, obviously, he's probably had an awful lot of those. So
sure.
he's very gruff, he's very to the point.
Mm.
You could say um, a bit more on the impolite side, but on the other hand, he's one of the most successful people in the country. So it's what you see on TV, to be honest, but
Yeah,
not
he always
not.
makes me laugh. He loves a pun, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly. He does like the puns. I think he rehearses the puns in advance.
I think so. I think so. I'm gonna finish off our little section on the Apprentice by asking you, having gone through all of it, the selection process, staying relatively isolated in that house for the period of time of filming, and the effects, including things like media. Would you do it? Would you have done it if you had known everything that would have happened, and would you do it again?
Yeah, I'd do that again. I mean, you're only young once, aren't you? So you may as well take up every experience. Absolutely, I'd do it.
That's it. And you can even do it when you get a bit older. So I've heard.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, let's have a little look at a few more questions. Well, let's have a look. We have got. Let's have a look at one from Simon. Simon's put spot on, Greg. Being an enterprise culture into the education system, learn how to buy and sell. Great point. Yeah, absolutely. Let's recognize the fact that we've got the lovely Johnny Joseph here from Los Angeles. Johnny is a franchise auditor and he's put late arrival, but hello from a weary Los Angeles. It's always good to have you with us, Johnny. Let's go to a question here from Joe. A general comment. The best in class franchisors are matching their concepts with prospective franchisees in their new franchise recruiting based on the 3 C's: capital, capabilities, and character. Yeah, I mean, this is when we were talking, Greg, about the barriers to entry for young people, and you mentioned there one of those, which is capital. But the other two there, capabilities, experience and skills, and character, that passion. What do you make about those 3 C's as the basis, not just for franchisee recruitment, but business in general?
I mean, capital's one aspect that can be sourced. Capabilities, absolutely, but it does come back to a previous point which was made. by Natalia, which I do agree with, which is obviously skills can be learned from scratch, but you need a willingness. So that's where the character comes in. I think if you've got the willingness and the character to pursue and push forward your ideas, you can achieve anything. Then you can achieve the capital, and then you can develop the skills possible. So, for example, one of my other things which I do is programming, and I taught myself programming during lockdown in Laravel and other various languages because I was sat at home. I didn't have anything to do. I was doing sale of antiques, but my parents wanted to build. My parents were trying to set up another antiques business, and they wanted a website. And the website platform, WordPress and Wix, was terrible, or at least wasn't suitable for what I wanted. So I taught myself to code. So you've got to have the character. You've got to have the willingness to sit on a computer for hours on end, trying to overcome the technical issues of how to program. And you've got to have a dedication to do it in the evenings until like 2-3 o'clock in the evening, and then sleep, and then retry for morning after, etc. And then also willingness to accept failure. So I think if you have a character, then you can develop capability, and you could always grow capital one way or another.
Love it. Love it. Great question, Joe, and a great answer, Greg. So thank you very much for that. Well, we have now come to a relatively new part of the show, and this is where we get under the hat of the guest. Now, this is a part where I will disappear for a moment or two, although you will still be able to hear me, because this is the part where I switch hats. And I've got a lovely new hat for this. So I will be back on the screen right now. And what do we think? A lovely new hat. And now, this part of the show is brought to you by PJ Murphy and Son, bespoke British hatters. So please scan the QR code if you like the look of my lovely hat, and you can get yourself one. So this is the part of the show where we stop talking about business and we stop talking about franchising, and we can ask you a few questions. Now, it really happens that your passions and your interests are also your business, I suppose. But can you tell us something about you that may not be known? Or I was going to say a claim to fame, but it's quite probably The Apprentice. Have you ever met anyone famous apart from the people on The Apprentice?
I mean, as a consequence of The Apprentice, yeah, I've met Olympic athletes and others. But
Wow. Who did
I mean,
you meet?
I've met a lot of few. I mean, one interesting client. I never met him. An interesting client of mine is what's his name? The guy who made Lord of the Rings. What's his name?
Oh, Peter.
Peter Jackson. He's my
Yeah.
client. He
Oh, wow.
buys off me.
Okay.
Because he's one of the largest military collectors in the world, and he bought a bunch of stuff which I sent to New Zealand a little while ago for his film studio. So never met him, but he was an interesting sort of chap. I have met lots of sort of celebrities, but it doesn't. I'm the worst person when it comes to this stuff because I don't have a clue who most celebrities are, to be honest. They say, "Oh, I went to XYZ." I thought, "Oh, cool. I don't think I've seen a series or an episode."
Yeah, I met Greg Davis once in a pub, and he had just spilt some sambucas on him, and I just told him he smelt of aniseed, and that's all I said to him. So it was really unfortunate.
I mean,
But
there was the other point, which is something I suppose I'm happy to answer the core point, which was anything which nobody knows about me.
Yeah.
So I think growing up there was my parents have always been a big inspiration of mine. And I think it goes back from a very young age. My father has a background in chartered accountancy, but he set up restaurants, hotels, etc. Built a wonderful house in Thailand many years ago, not being able to speak Thai, just flew there and lived there for 8 to 12 months and built this big Thai house, which got on the Thai magazine as the best house in the country. But I think my childhood memory, which I think was most impressionable to me, and it's not a negative story. It's a terrible event. It was obviously a negative background, but it was very impressionable from a young age when you're a young man. And I think that was back 2004, actually. As a young man, we were in Thailand in Boxing Day on the beach in Thailand during the tsunami. We've just had the anniversary last year, didn't we, for the Thai Boxing Day?
Yeah.
So I got stranded on this island for a period of 2 to 3 weeks when the tsunami hit. And we were in Krabi, facing inland. So the sea hit our island, and we were next to the beach, but we were facing inland on this island.
Wow.
And the other side of the island was destroyed, and our hotel was the only one out of 8 which survived. So my parents So what happened shortly after the tsunami hit and Boxing Day, my mum with a kitchen by cooking background, took over the kitchen. The manager of our hotel flew by helicopter to the mainland and fled, along with many of the staff. A core number of staff who stayed worked with my mum and dad, and they ran this hotel for 4,000 residents on this island during the tsunami, or just after the tsunami, and fed every single person for a period of 2 weeks. I think it was. My memory's very vague. I was only 8 years old at the time. During this particular occasion. Now, I didn't see anything terrible because obviously, as a young man, I was oblivious to it all. And because our hotel was facing inland, slightly above the waterline, we weren't impacted by the tsunami. But when you go to the other side, and there was like boats and trees and boats and pools and stuff. Very, very impressionable experience. But I remember seeing, as a young man, I remember some of the German. Unfortunately, there was a lot of tourists from various different parts of the world. I do remember some tourists, and they were complaining that the food wasn't very good shortly after the tsunami, which is quite sort of comedic. And some complained considerably about the service. But I mean, I think why I come to that core point is because my parents who obviously have a kitchen background, but they still managed a hotel for 4,000 people during a national catastrophe and ran it until the staff came, and we were short on food and they just made slop, and they supported this. They kept everybody fed and healthy. And I think that's very memorable because it brings to light a lot of things, which is we complain about a lot of small things in the world, but I think the bigger issue is so many people who suffer and undergo traumatic experiences, and they're able to overcome adversity through just pure willpower alone and a willingness to try. So I think that's always a memory which I have from a young age. Now, I know, good looking back, I was probably more inclined about the new video game I got for Boxing Day, which was on Island of Thunder. But I do still remember that.
Yeah. I'm sure you do. What a powerful story, and thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't know that as well. So, and it must have had an effect, and a real positive effect from something that was, a real tragic event. But it's good that you had a positive story about it and helping others, and having that determination to come over it. So yeah.
Also, my uncle in Thailand. What I would like to sort of come back to another point. I do believe that the culture, the work, the entrepreneurial culture is a lot less in the UK compared to other countries. So my uncle in Thailand is a civil engineer by trade, and he built his first skyscraper at the age of 20. And yet now, going on 50, he's set up a shrimp farm, a gold mine. He's worked in civil engineering for billionaires building golf courses, and various other businesses. I mean, to go from civil engineer to shrimp farm to gold mining, and then he set up a peregrine falcon business to scare off birds from airfields. I mean, wow. Talking about lack of experience and sort of getting your hand into completely different things. I think it proves that I'm always, obviously you always need a background, but it goes back to the personality, which is you need a willingness. If you've got a willingness to sort of try and fight every inch of ground to achieve what you want, absolutely. You can achieve anything. It just takes a lot of commitment.
Love it.
You will fail, but if you keep trying, I think you'll eventually get there. But it is willingness.
Fantastic. No, I love that. Well, look, we have come to the end. I don't like to keep people too much longer than about 50 minutes. I'd first of all like to thank everyone who has been here live with us today. Anybody who watches this in the future, this show is what it is because of you all. And I'd like to thank you, Greg, for your time and sharing your story with us. It's been absolutely fantastic, a real pleasure for me. And I hope that we can keep in touch. You've been a real pleasure to talk to. Thank you so much, Greg.
Could I just mention my business quickly? Sorry.
Of course you can. I was just going to get to that.
Oh, no worries. First, Simon, I don't sell Cheftons, but I have got a Cannons if you're interested. And secondly, my business is theantiquestores.com. So for anybody who wants an antique of different sorts, or you've got an item you're looking for, paintings, furniture, jewelry, art, whatever, drop me a message. It's on theantiquestores.com.
Fantastic. And if you scan the QR code to your top left at the moment, that will also take you to that exact same web page. So please scan that QR code, support the wonderful Greg and his business. And again, Greg, thank you so much for today. So that leads me just to let you know what's happening later this week on our sister show, Franchising Brand Stories. That's going to be Thursday, the 23rd of January, 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST. We are going to be finding out what's under the hat of Stagecoach with the lovely Lisa Stead. So please join us for that one. Now, next week on the Franchise Show, we are going to be talking to Penny Hopkinson and Steve Ennis, and we're going to be talking all about franchise mentorship. So that's going to be a fascinating conversation. So please join us next Tuesday at 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST. So until next time, my friends, have a fantastic week ahead and take very